Now, similar to what's going on in Syria, some Bahrainis are struggling to topple a leader who is desperate to keep control of the country. As a result, peaceful protesters are being hunted down, arrested, interrogated, tortured, and even murdered. Here now to look further into the conflict in Bahrain, as well as the international response, is RT Arabic correspondent Rima Abu Hamdia. Hey there, Rima. So let's start off by talking about what's going on in Bahrain, and more importantly, why are we not hearing about it?
A lot of the reason, or the main reason why we're not hearing about what's going on in Bahrain is because the media decides to ignore what's going on in Bahrain. And when I say the media, it's not just the foreign media, it's also a lot of the Arab media as well. What's going on in Bahrain is basically another spring that people in that country thought that they're having, just like other neighboring countries. But for their dismay, their calls did not reach any ears in the Arab world and in the international community, and so far there are a lot of protests. We see that on YouTube, we see that in blogs. Activists report on these activities there, but no one reports about these activities.
So let's talk about the differences between Syria and Bahrain. On one hand, the U.S. is condemning Syria's President Bashar al-Assad for what he is doing to his people and trying to keep control of his country. But on the other hand, we have these human rights abuses that are happening in Bahrain, and the U.S. is ignoring it and possibly even arming the country's leaders. So what is with this double standard when it comes to human rights?
A lot of people would tell you that the U.S. is actually speaking out against the issue of the violations in Bahrain. But if you look at what exactly they're saying, it's not the same tone. It's not the same accusations. It's completely different from what they would accuse the Syrian regime of what they're doing. People would tell you, yeah, because the Syrian regime is doing a lot far more damage to the cities, to the people than what the Bahraini regime is doing. But this comparison is not really valid. I mean, the country is a lot smaller. The kingdom is a lot smaller. The population is not as big as the one in Syria. So you can't compare casualties in these two countries. But it's a strategic, important part of the Arab world, of the Gulf countries, to the U.S. And so far, the U.S. thinks that by keeping silent, maybe, or not accusing the Bahraini regime of what they're doing exactly, they're basically helping to the stability in that region, in that part of the world.
So, Rima, one thing that we have seen go against the Syrian government, we have had this strong U.S. talk against Bashar al-Assad. We have seen them try to impose sanctions, try to limit the violence to the country and to limit the power that Bashar al-Assad has. What are we seeing with Bahrain? Is anything happening at this point other than talk?
I mean, people will tell you that there may be some who are trying to silence the human rights organizations who are trying to speak out against what's going on in Bahrain. No sanctions, no talk of maybe sales of weapons to the Bahraini regime, none of that. And actually, the calls that the people are making, the cries that the people are making are not getting to any ear in the U.S. or in any other foreign country. A lot of people would decided to just ignore what's going on in Bahrain. And again, not just in the West, but also in the Arab countries. A lot of people wouldn't even talk about what's going on in Bahrain. And we saw what some of the Arab countries, how they helped the Bahraini regime when the protest started in that country. They sent troops to help crush, if you want to use that word, the protesters there. We saw what happened in the Lu'lu'a square in that country, and no one talked about that. So people simply decided to ignore what's going on in Bahrain. And maybe a lot of it has to do also with the fact that the protesters in that part of the country or in that part of the region are Shi'is, and the regime is Sunni, and the help that the regime is getting from Sunni governments.
So let's pause the conversation there. I do want to talk about another thing that's happening in the region. One of the reasons that they say Bahrain is so important is because of its strategic geolocation, basically meaning that they have access to a bunch of things that the U.S. kind of wants. That's why the U.S. has its fleet there.